Hello, my friends, and welcome back to Western Tales Memories. Today, I want to share a story about a man named Jonas Hale, a man who once believed silence could keep him safe. Maybe you've known someone like that, or maybe you've been him. The winter of 1886 had settled hard over the Wyoming highlands. Snow lay heavy on the ridges. The sky was steel gray and still, and every sound a cracking branch. A breath of wind seemed loud enough to break the world in two. Out there, in that frozen wilderness, Jonas Hale walked alone, 50-something, shoulders broad, beard rimed with frost. He'd built himself a cabin high above Elk Valley, a place so far from town that even loneliness had to climb to reach him. For 6 long years, he'd lived with nothing but the whisper of the pines, the company of a dog named Buck, and the ghost of a past he didn't care to name. Folks down in Elk Fork used to talk about him. Said he'd once been a lawman, the kind who never missed his mark. But something happened. Something that burned him down from the inside out. After that, he hung up his badge, rode north, and let the mountains swallow him whole. Now, on this particular morning, the air was sharp as broken glass. Jonas trudged through the snow, rifle slung over his shoulder, eyes scanning the horizon like a man who expected nothing and still feared what he might find. And that's when he saw it. Down by the frozen creek, half buried in snow, a busted wagon, splintered and silent. Beside it, a woman's hand, pale against the ice, and a boy maybe 10 years old, clawing at the snow, crying out with a voice that cut through the wind, "Please, Mr. Help my ma." Jonas stopped. For the first time in years, the mountain wasn't silent anymore. And deep inside, beneath all that ice, something old and human began to stir. Jonas Hale stood there in the falling snow, his breath curling like smoke in the gray air. Down by the frozen creek, that busted wagon looked like a carcass left behind by time itself, half buried. Broken. Forgotten. He'd seen plenty of wreckage in his life-burned towns. Empty homes. Men who'd lost everything, but never one that called out to him the way this one did. The boy was small. No more than 10. Maybe 11. His mittens were soaked. His lips cracked from cold, but he kept digging, bare hands clawing at the snow. As if by sheer will, he could lift the weight of the world off the woman lying there. She was caught beneath a beam of the wagon, her coat torn, the fabric stiff with blood. Her hair, once golden maybe, was now matted with frost, and her eyes, when they opened, carried that dull, far-away look Jonas had seen before in dying soldiers. He watched them for a long, strange moment. Something in him, maybe the part that still knew how to care, fought against the part that just wanted to walk away. He'd spent years avoiding trouble, and here trouble was, staring right up at him with a child's desperate eyes. The boy looked up through his tears. "Please, Mister," he choked out, voice shaking in the wind. "Help my ma." Those 4 words, simple as snowflakes, sharp as a blade, hit Jonas harder than any bullet. He took one step forward, then another, and just like that, the mountain's silence was broken. He knelt beside the woman, feeling the tremor in her breath, the weak beat beneath her skin. A gunshot wound, high through the arm, clean enough to live. If she had warmth and time, she tried to speak, her lips trembling. "They'll come, 3 of them, maybe 4. Don't let them take my boy." Then her head fell back, her body going still, except for a faint, shallow rise beneath her coat. Jonas looked at the boy, "What's your name?" "Son Tommy," he said, his voice barely more than a whisper. "She's my ma." "Claire," Jonas nodded once. Curt, like a man sealing a deal with himself. He lifted the woman first. She was light. Too light, then tucked the boy close beneath his coat. The snow started again, thick and wild. And by the time he turned toward home, the storm had swallowed the tracks behind them. For a while, the only sound was the wind. Then the boy spoke again, muffled against Jonas's chest. "Are you gonna save her?" Jonas didn't answer right away. He wasn't sure he could. But he tightened his grip on the boy and said, low and steady, "I'll try." They moved slow through the drifts, the sky closing in around them. Jonas's cabin was nearly a mile up the ridge, a long mile when you're carrying more than just two bodies. Each step burned his lungs. Each gust of wind tried to push him back down the mountain. But he kept moving. One foot, then the other. He'd carried weight like this before a wounded partner. Once, years ago, back when he still wore the badge. He hadn't made it that time. The man died before they reached shelter. And for 6 long years, Jonas had lived with that same weight pressing down on his heart. Now, as the storm screamed around him, he wondered if maybe this was his chance to set something right. When at last the cabin came into view, dark wood against white snow, Jonas nearly stumbled from relief. He reached the door, kicked it open, and let the warmth of the fire hit them like a wave. The boy clung to his sleeve, refusing to let go even when Jonas tried to set him down. "It's all right, son," Jonas murmured. "You're safe now." But even as he said it, he knew the words weren't true. Not yet. Somewhere out there, in the white silence, men were following. Men who'd shot a woman and left her to die. Men who'd finish the job if they found the trail. Jonas laid Claire on his bed, covered her with blankets, and glanced at the rifle by the door. It hadn't been fired in years, but as he looked at it now, he felt the old weight settle in his hands again. He could hear the boy's breathing beside the hearth, uneven. Frightened, Jonas poured a cup of water, then sat down slow, the wood creaking under his weight. "Get some rest, Tommy," he said quietly. "Your ma's gonna need you strong come morning." Outside, the wind howled over the ridge, and in its sound, Jonas thought he heard something else, a whisper of footsteps still far off. A reminder that peace, like silence, never lasts long on the mountain. And for the first time in years, Jonas Hale prayed that dawn would come late. The storm came down hard that night, thick snow beating against the cabin walls like a drum. Inside, the air was heavy with wood smoke and the sharp sting of whiskey. Jonas Hale worked in silence. Sleeves rolled to his elbows, a needle and thread trembling slightly between his rough fingers. Claire lay still on the bed, her face pale beneath the flicker of firelight. Her breathing was shallow, every rise and fall of her chest a quiet fight against pain. Jonas had seen men die slower, and he'd seen them die faster, but something about the way this woman clung to life made him steady his hands and keep going. The boy, Tommy, crouched near the fire, feeding it small logs one after another, his face set with a kind of fierce concentration only children have. Every time the flames sputtered, he leaned forward, as if his will alone could keep them alive. Jonas rinsed the wound with whiskey. Claire stirred, gasping, and her hand shot up to grab his wrist. For a moment, their eyes met his, dark and cautious, hers bright and fevered. She didn't cry out, didn't flinch again. When he finished stitching, he wrapped her arm with strips of torn linen, then sat back on the edge of the chair, the weight of the long winter pressing down on his shoulders. He hadn't spoken since they'd come through the door, and when he finally did, his voice came out low, hoarse, like it hadn't been used in years. "Try to drink," he said, lifting the tin cup to her lips. Claire obeyed, barely, the water dribbling down her chin. When she spoke, her words were cracked and soft. "Why help strangers in a storm?" Jonas looked into the fire, the light dancing across his face, deepening the lines carved there by solitude. "Long winter," he said quietly. "Hard to tell who's saving who." No one spoke after that. The wind filled the silence, moaning through the cracks, shaking the door. But inside, the fire held its own, its warmth drawing the three of them into a fragile kind of peace. Tommy moved closer to the bed, his small hand finding his mother's fingers. Jonas watched as the boy's shoulders finally relaxed, the fight in him replaced by exhaustion. The dog, old Buck, crept in from the corner, curling himself beside the boy's feet with a sigh. For a long while, Jonas just sat there, listening to the breathing hers, the boy's, his own. The rhythm of it filled the cabin, a slow, human sound that had been missing for far too long. His mind drifted backward to another winter, another life, a prison fire in Cheyenne, iron bars glowing red, a boy screaming behind them. Jonas had been the deputy on duty that night. He remembered the heat, the smoke, the moment he'd had to choose between the living and the dying. He'd chosen wrong, and the sound of that child's cries had followed him into every storm since. Now, as he watched the flames curl around the wood, Jonas felt that old guilt twist again, only softer this time, like something loosening its grip. Claire's voice broke through the memory. "Your hands," she murmured, eyes half closed. "You've done this before." He nodded, but didn't answer. She gave a faint smile, the kind people wear when they've guessed the truth. Then she drifted back into sleep, her breath shallow but even. Tommy had fallen asleep too, head resting against the side of the bed, his fingers still tangled in his mother's hand. Jonas leaned back in his chair. The firelight softened, painting the cabin in shades of amber and gold. Outside, the wind screamed itself hoarse, but inside there was warmth, a small, stubborn pocket of life against the cold world pressing in. He watched the boy sleeping, watched the woman's chest rise and fall, and felt something inside him shift, something he hadn't allowed himself to feel in years. It wasn't hope, not yet, but it was close. He reached for the poker and stirred the fire, sending sparks climbing up the chimney like stars. Then he spoke, not to them, maybe not even to himself, but to the quiet that had ruled his life for so long. "Guess the mountain ain't mine alone anymore," he whispered, and for the first time in 6 winters, the silence in that cabin didn't feel like a burden. It felt like company. Night came crawling down the mountain like a living thing, howling through the trees, shaking the cabin at its seams. The fire inside burned low, its glow reaching just far enough to hold back the dark, and in that fragile circle of light sat Jonas Hale, rifle across his knees, oil rag in hand, eyes fixed on something only he could see. He moved slow, deliberate, the way a man does when he's not cleaning a gun but cleaning his conscience. The woman, Claire, lay still on the bed, her face glistening with fever. Every so often, she murmured something from the edge of sleep, half words, half fear. "They're coming," she whispered. "3 men. They won't stop." Jonas looked up, jaw tightening, the light catching the hard lines of his face. He didn't ask who they were. He didn't need to. He'd known men like that, men who chased a woman through the snow, who carried the law in their mouths and hell in their hearts. For a moment, the fire popped, and the sound carried him backward in time. Smoke, screams, the crack of burning timber. He was there again, the Cheyenne jailhouse. Years ago. The night the fire started in the west cell. He remembered the heat rising so fast it sucked the air from his lungs. The iron bars glowing red, bending like soft clay, and a boy's voice small, desperate, pleading from behind the flames, "Marshal Hale, please." He'd tried. God knows he'd tried. But the roof came down before he could reach that cell. When they pulled him out, his hands were burned raw, and the sound of that child's cries still clung to his skin like smoke. Jonas blinked hard, the memory slipping away like steam over the coals. He stared into the fire, the same fire he'd once feared, and muttered under his breath, as if answering some voice only he could hear, "Not again." Outside, the storm screamed across the ridge. But inside the cabin, it was quiet, the kind of quiet that comes before a reckoning, because not all ghosts come from the dead. Some wear a badge, and some still hold a gun. Morning came hard and silver, the kind of cold that cuts a man clean through. The storm had passed, but it left the world sharper, every sound clear, every shadow deep. Jonas Hale stepped outside into that brittle light, snow crunching beneath his boots. Down the ridge, the land spread out in silence, a white ocean of frozen earth and pine. And there, half a mile below, he saw them tracks, 3 sets of prints, narrow and deliberate, curving wide through the timber. Riders, they'd found the trail. Jonas crouched low, brushed the snow from a hoof mark, and felt the shape of the steel rim. No townsfolk shoes, these were hard men, the kind who made their living on someone else's blood. He straightened, the breath from his lungs turning to mist that drifted toward the trees. The hunt had begun. When he stepped back into the cabin, the fire was still burning low. Steady, Claire sat propped against the wall, color returning to her cheeks. The fever had broken, but her eyes held that wary calm of someone who's lived too long with fear. Jonas set his rifle on the table. "They found the trail," he said. "They'll be here before sundown." For a moment, the words just hung there in the air, like frost waiting to fall. Claire didn't flinch. She reached for the old revolver lying near the hearth, checked the cylinder, and cocked it with a click that sounded louder than the wind outside. "I can shoot," she said. Jonas studied her, saw the tremor in her bandaged arm, and the fire in her eyes that burned stronger than pain. He nodded once, then shoot straight. The boy, Tommy, didn't speak. He just went on stacking wood, his small face set with a seriousness beyond his years. The dog lay near the door, ears pricked, waiting. No one said another word after that. They didn't need to. Each of them moved with quiet purpose, the woman cleaning her gun, the boy feeding the fire, and the man checking the rifle that had been silent too long. Outside, the sun rose pale over the ridge, turning the snow to glass. Inside, 3 souls waited in its reflection, bound by circumstance. and by something older than fear. The silence was heavy. But it wasn't empty anymore. It was the stillness before violence, the breath a man takes before he decides who he truly is. The day stretched long and pale, the kind of cold that made sound carry for miles. By late afternoon, the wind had gone quiet, and that silence, sharp as glass, was worse than any storm. Jonas Hale stood by the window, watching the light fade from the ridge. He'd been listening all day, the way a man listens when he knows something's coming. And now, he heard it faint but certain. Hoofbeats. Slow. Measured. 3 of them. They came over the rise like dark stains on the snow riders wrapped in dusters. Rifles easy across their saddles. The one in front rode straight and proud, his coat black as coal, his eyes colder than the wind itself. Caleb Foss. Jonas knew the type, bounty man, the kind who hunted both for pay and for pleasure. The 3 horses stopped a few yards from the cabin. Voss looked up, his breath ghosting in the air. "We're looking for a woman and her boy," he called. "Shot a man in Cheyenne. You seen him." Old timer. Jonas stepped into the doorway, rifle resting easy in his hands. His voice came calm, steady, a sound that seemed to belong to the mountain itself. "Only ghosts live up here, for a heartbeat." Nobody moved. Then Voss smiled, a thin, cutting thing with no warmth at all. "Well then," he said, "let's see if they answer when I knock." The first shot tore through the stillness. Glass shattered. Splinters flew, and the cabin filled with smoke and thunder. Jonas dropped low, returning fire before the echo died. His first shot found the man on the left, knocked him clean off his horse. The others scattered, shouting curses swallowed by the wind. Inside, Tommy ducked under the table, arms wrapped around the dog's neck. "Don't be scared, buddy," he whispered. "He's gonna win. He always does." Claire crouched near the east window, the old revolver steady in her trembling hands. Jonas called out, "Keep your head down." But when the second rider charged, she stood and fired. The shot cracked true. The man reeled, horse bucking beneath him, and vanished into the snow. Jonas turned surprised, maybe even proud, but the moment cost him. A bullet slammed through the doorframe, grazing his shoulder. He stumbled back, teeth clenched, blood seeping dark through his coat. He didn't cry out, didn't stop. He just reloaded, slow and sure, like a man counting heartbeats. Voss was still out there, circling wide. Jonas could feel him, a predator waiting for the right shadow. He pushed the pain down deep, listening to the crunch of boots in snow, the scrape of metal against bark. Then silence again, the kind that makes your bones ache. Woman Voss's voice came cold from the tree line. "Give us the boy, and we'll let you live." Claire's answer was soft, but it carried clean through the still air. "You'll have to walk through me first." Voss laughed, a sound that didn't belong to any human kindness. Then the woods came alive again. Bullets tore through the walls. Splinters danced in the firelight. Jonas fired back. Every shot measured, every breath steady as prayer. The smell of gunpowder mixed with pine smoke, thick and bitter. The dog barked, fierce and fearless. Tommy pressed his hands over his ears, eyes wide, whispering the same words again and again, like a charm against death. "He's gonna win. He's gonna win." Then came the quiet again, the kind that follows only when the world runs out of noise. Jonas leaned against the doorframe, blood soaking through his sleeve. The ache in his shoulder pulsed with every heartbeat. Outside, the snow was torn and dirty, the shapes of two men lying still against the white. But Caleb Voss was gone, somewhere out there, waiting. Claire rose from the window, her face pale but steady. She crossed the room, pressed a strip of cloth against Jonas's wound. "You're hit," she said. He shook his head. "Just a scratch." She smiled faintly, the kind of smile that knows better. Then she looked toward the window, the gray world beyond. "He'll come back." Jonas met her gaze. "Then we'll be ready." He turned back to the rifle, checked the chamber, and looked once more toward the ridge. The fire snapped, throwing sparks into the air like falling stars. And in that moment, amid the blood, the smoke, the ruin, Jonas felt something he hadn't in years. Not anger, not fear, belonging. He wasn't fighting for a bounty or for a ghost from his past. He was fighting for a woman and a boy, for a piece of warmth in a cold, uncaring land. Outside, the night thickened. Somewhere in the dark, a horse snorted, and a man's boots crunched softly in the snow. The siege wasn't over, but the silence between gunfire told its own story, one of a man who'd finally found something worth standing for. The night had gone deathly still. Snow drifted slow through the air, catching what little moonlight there was. Jonas Hale stepped out into it slow, cautious, breathing steam into the cold. The rifle felt heavy in his hands now, his shoulder throbbing with each heartbeat. He could taste iron on his tongue, smell gunpowder in his beard. Behind him, the cabin glowed faint and warm, a single pocket of life against a world carved from ice. He wasn't defending walls anymore. He was defending what had stepped into his life and changed it. A woman, a boy, a reason. Then he heard it. A shift of snow, the soft jingle of a spur. Caleb Voss stepped from the tree line, his black coat fluttering like a crow's wing in the wind. "Should have stayed out of this, old man," he said, voice low, steady. Jonas didn't answer. He just raised the rifle. The flash came fast, 2 shots. One scream, then both men were in the snow, rolling, striking, grunting like beasts. The rifle flew from Jonas's hands, Voss's knife flashing in the moonlight. Jonas caught the blade once, twice, felt it tear his coat, slice his skin. The world narrowed to the sound of his own breath and the taste of blood. He'd been in fights before, men's fights, ugly and final, but never one that mattered this much. Voss drove him down, snow turning red beneath them. Lawmandy slow. The bounty man hissed, and maybe he would have been right if not for the sound that came next. A rifle cracked sharp, clean, final. Voss's body jerked once, then went still, falling back into the snow with eyes wide open to nothing. Jonas lay there, chest heaving, watching the smoke drift from the muzzle of Claire's gun. She was standing a few yards away, barefoot in the snow, hair loose, eyes bright in the half-light. She dropped to her knees beside him, pressing her hand against his wound, warm blood seeping between her fingers. "You don't get to die alone. Jonas Hale," she whispered. He looked at her, really looked, and for the first time in years, the silence between them wasn't empty. It was full of breath, of warmth, of something that felt an awful lot like grace. Weeks passed, and the mountain changed its face. The snow began to melt, slow and certain, running down the rocks in silver ribbons. The air no longer bit, it breathed. Jonas Hale's cabin still stood, patched and scarred, but standing just the same. Smoke rose from the chimney again, not the desperate kind, but the kind that means supper's on and the day's been good. Claire was out front, hands in the earth, planting the first seeds of spring. Tommy laughed somewhere near the creek, the old dog bounding after him, barking at shadows and water. That sound laughter was something the ridge hadn't heard in a long, long while. Jonas worked the fence line, hammering slow, steady strokes. The wound in his shoulder still ached some mornings, but the ache was just proof he was alive and that he'd stayed. One afternoon, the sheriff from Elk Fork rode up. He tipped his hat and said, "Town could use a steady hand again." Jonas looked down the valley, where Claire knelt among her rows, and Tommy's laughter drifted through the pine. After a moment, he smiled small, but sure. "Reckon I already got one." The sheriff nodded and rode off, leaving only the wind and the quiet. Jonas turned toward the ridge, its snow now soft and glistening under the sun. And in that moment, the mountain didn't look lonely anymore. It looked alive. "Some debts get paid not in blood," he said softly, "but in staying. Maybe that's what it means to come home." And friends, that's today's tale on Western Tales Memories. Tell me what you think down in the comments where you're listening from, and what part spoke to you most. Don't forget to like, share, and subscribe, so you'll be here when the next story rides in.